She was just 17 when her parents sold her off like a piece of livestock. In their eyes, she was no longer valuable. The doctors had whispered the word infertile after a bout of childhood sickness left her with permanent damage. In a small, dusty western town where daughters were expected to become wives and bear children, this diagnosis made her useless. Her name was Clara, and from the day her parents signed the papers and sent her away, her world darkened. She remembered that morning vividly. Her mother couldn't meet her eyes. Her father handed her a bundle of clothes and told her to behave herself. No tears, no explanation. Just a firm push toward a carriage driven by a stranger. The man who took her was old and bitter, a loner who'd paid what little money he had for someone he could use for cooking, cleaning, and companionship in his empty cabin on the edge of the valley. He never spoke kindly, never smiled. He reminded her daily that she was broken, that her parents had traded her for less than the cost of a mule. Clara worked from sunrise to sunset. Her hands were always raw, her feet blistered. The days blurred into each other, filled with silence, chores, and the sharp sting of loneliness. Every now and then, the man would drink, and those nights were the worst. She learned to disappear into herself, to silence the pain and carry on. No one came looking for her. No one cared. In that vast, empty land, she might as well have vanished. One stormy night, after 2 long years, she ran. She didn't plan it. She just felt something snap inside her. With only a coat and a loaf of bread, she slipped into the rain, heart pounding. The darkness swallowed her, but it felt freer than any day she'd spent in that cabin. She walked until her legs gave out, then crawled. She didn't know where she was going, only that she couldn't stay. By dawn, she collapsed at the edge of a dirt road, her vision blurred, lips cracked, body shaking. That's when she heard the creaking of wagon wheels and the muffled sound of children laughing. A tall man in a wide-brimmed hat pulled his horses to a stop and jumped down. He knelt beside her, brushing wet hair from her face. His voice was gentle, something she hadn't heard in years. "You all right, miss?" She wanted to speak, but only tears came. He lifted her effortlessly, set her in the back of the wagon, where 5 young faces stared at her with wide eyes. He gave her water, wrapped her in a blanket, and kept glancing back as they rode. She drifted into unconsciousness, with the sound of children's laughter still dancing in her ears. When she awoke, she was in a small farmhouse nestled in the hills. The man introduced himself as Jack Callahan, a widower and father of 5. His wife had died in childbirth 3 winters ago, and he'd been raising their children alone ever since. Life hadn't been easy, but he managed. He said she could stay until she got her strength back. Claire nodded, unsure if she should trust the kindness in his eyes. Jack never asked too many questions. He let her help around the house when she felt up to it, never pushed. The children took to her quickly, especially the youngest, Lily, who clung to her like a shadow. For the first time in years, Clara smiled. It felt foreign at first, like something her muscles had forgotten how to do. But it grew easier. Weeks passed, then months. Clara began to laugh again, to find peace in baking bread, sewing clothes, brushing Lily's hair. Jack watched her with quiet admiration, never pressing, never expecting. He treated her like she mattered. It was something new, something sacred. One evening, as the sun dipped below the hills and painted the sky in gold, Jack found her sitting on the porch, with Lily curled beside her. He sat beside her, sipping coffee. "I never asked what brought you here," he said gently. Clara hesitated. Her voice trembled as she told him everything. About her parents, the man, the years of pain and loneliness. She braced for judgment, for pity. But Jack didn't flinch. He reached over and took her hand. "You're here now. That's what matters. You're safe." Clara cried that night, not from sadness, but from release. The weight she'd carried for so long was finally shared. Jack didn't see her as broken. The children didn't either. To them, she was love, warmth, a new light in their home. Years passed, and Clara became part of the Callahan family. She never left. She didn't need to. Jack and the children filled the hollow spaces inside her, and she poured herself into them with all the love she had stored away. She couldn't bear children of her own, but she mothered those 5 with a fierceness and tenderness that came from deep within. Jack eventually asked her to marry him, not because he needed a wife, but because he wanted to share his life with her. He loved her, not despite her past, but because of her strength, her heart. Clara said yes with tears in her eyes. And in that little farmhouse tucked away in the western hills, Clara found what she had been denied her whole life. Not just a home, but a purpose, a family, a place where she was not just wanted, but needed, loved. She was no longer the girl who had been sold. She was Clara Callahan, a mother, a wife, a survivor. And this time, no one could take her away. Clara often stood by the window in the early mornings, watching the lights stretch slowly across the fields. The golden hues spilling over the hills made everything look softer, more alive. She'd hold a cup of coffee close to her chest, the warmth grounding her as the world woke around her. The kids would start rustling from their rooms soon, and the routine would begin. Breakfast, school lessons, chores. But for a few minutes, it was quiet, peaceful. Sometimes in those still moments, the past crept back in. Not the sharp, aching parts that used to haunt her at night, but the memories that reminded her of how far she'd come. She would remember the cold wooden floors of the cabin she had once been trapped in, the stale air, the silence that screamed. Then she would look around their farmhouse where laughter now echoed through the halls, and she'd smile. This, this life, was not something she ever believed she'd have. Jack never pushed her to speak of those darker days again, but he listened when she chose to. He held her when the memories surfaced, whispered softly that she was safe, that she was home. His steadiness had become her anchor, and she had become his strength in return. The townsfolk had their opinions when Jack first brought her into town. Whispers followed them when they went to church or the general store. People wondered where she came from, why she was there. Some judged her for not having children of her own, for stepping into a life that wasn't hers by birthright. But Clara never flinched. She held her head high and gripped Lily's hand a little tighter. Eventually, they stopped whispering, because they saw the way the Callahan children beamed when she walked into the room. They saw how Jack's eyes softened when he looked at her, how the farm flourished under her care, how the house seemed warmer, more alive. Clara didn't just fit into the family, she had become its heartbeat. There was one moment, a year after Jack proposed, that Clara would never forget. It was a particularly harsh winter, and their middle boy, Ethan, had come down with a terrible fever. Clara had sat by his bed for 3 straight nights, refusing to leave his side. She read to him, wiped his brow, whispered prayers into the dark. Jack begged her to rest, but she wouldn't, not until he was safe. On the morning Ethan's fever finally broke, Clara fell asleep in the chair by his bed, her hands still wrapped around his. When she woke up, Jack was standing in the doorway, watching her with tears in his eyes. He walked over, knelt beside her, and said, "You are the strongest woman I've ever known. These children, they were mine by birth, but they're yours by love." That was the day she truly let go of her last bit of doubt. Her past, painful and jagged, had shaped her, but it didn't define her. She had found her identity not in what was taken from her, but in what she gave. Years moved forward like the steady rhythm of the seasons. The children grew. Lily, the youngest, often followed Clara into the kitchen, mimicking her every move. Clara taught her how to knead dough, how to embroider, how to find strength in silence. As the children aged, they would sometimes ask about their real mother. Clara never pretended to replace her, but she told them stories of love, of courage, of the kind of woman she believed Jack's first wife had been. She wanted them to hold on to that legacy, even as they created a new one together. One evening, after a long day of work and laughter, the family sat on the porch, watching a summer storm roll in across the plains. The sky turned lavender and charcoal, streaks of lightning dancing far in the distance. Jack put his arm around Clara as Lily curled into her lap. The boys sat on the steps, talking about horses and fishing. It was a simple moment, but one that filled Clara's heart to the brim. She turned to Jack and whispered, "I used to think I was nothing, that I was broken, beyond repair." Jack looked at her with those same steady eyes and replied, "You were never broken. You were waiting to be seen." Clara's eyes welled with tears, not of sorrow, but of gratitude. Because even though she had been discarded, even though her life had begun with pain and abandonment, she had not been lost forever. She had been found by a man with gentle hands and 5 children who taught her what unconditional love truly looked like. In the years that followed, Clara and Jack became a quiet legend in their small town. People spoke of their strength, their kindness, the way they never turned away anyone in need. Their farm became a place of refuge for others who had known pain. A young widow once arrived at their doorstep with 2 small children, and Clara took her in without a second thought. "Everyone deserves a second chance," she'd said. On Clara's 50th birthday, the children, now grown, threw her a celebration under the oak tree behind the house. They invited everyone from town, even some she hadn't seen in years. Lily, now a young woman with Clara's resilience in her bones, stood up to speak. "My mama wasn't born into our family," she said, voice trembling, "but she was born for it." There wasn't a dry eye in the crowd. Jack stood behind Clara, hands on her shoulders, as she wiped her tears and smiled at the people who had become her world. She looked out across the faces and thought of her parents, the ones who had given her away. A part of her still ached, wondering why they hadn't loved her enough to fight for her. But in that moment, surrounded by love, she finally understood something. Sometimes, family isn't what you're born into. It's what you build, what you choose, what you fight for. She never returned to the town of her birth. She never saw her parents again. But she forgave them, not for their sake, but for her own. Because holding on to bitterness would have kept her tied to a life that no longer belonged to her. Clara had risen from that darkness. She had turned pain into purpose, rejection into redemption. When Jack passed years later, peacefully in his sleep beside her, Clara held his hand until the morning light filled the room. She grieved him deeply, but with a heart full of memories. The children rallied around her, refusing to let her grieve alone. And though the house felt quieter, she was never truly alone. She continued to care for the land, to tell stories by the fire, to braid Lily's daughter's hair, just like she used to braid Lily's. She grew older, but never tired of the love that surrounded her. Her past remained a part of her, but it no longer held power over her. Clara had once been sold, discarded like something broken. But in the end, she had been treasured. She had been chosen. She had built a legacy not of blood, but of boundless love. And that was more than enough. Spring came early that year, with rainstorms washing over the land and wildflowers blooming in unexpected places. Clara found herself humming as she worked in the garden, her hands deep in the soil, planting roots that felt symbolic of her own. She had never imagined herself as someone who would belong to a place, who would be loved, needed, and remembered. But here she was, making jam with the girls, stitching worn pants for the boys, and kissing Jack's cheek with a smile that lit up her whole face. One evening, as they sat down for supper, Henry, the oldest of the children, stood up with a serious look on his face. He was almost 16 now, tall like Jack, with strong shoulders and thoughtful eyes. "I got offered a job over at the O'Malley Ranch," he said, voice steady. "They need a hand with the cattle run this season." Jack nodded. "That's good work." Claire's heart tightened. She had helped raise Henry. She remembered when he was shorter than the table, and now he was talking about leaving. She smiled, even though it hurt. "You'll do well," she said softly. "Just don't forget to come home sometimes." Henry's face softened, and he crossed the room to hug her, something he hadn't done in years. "You're the reason I'm even ready for the world, Clara," he whispered. "You're my ma, even if you didn't birth me." She broke into tears then. Not because he was leaving, but because she realized he had already given her everything she'd ever wanted. She had a son. She had 5. That night, Jack found Clara sitting alone by the fireplace. He wrapped a blanket around her shoulders and kissed her temple. You okay? She nodded. I just, I didn't know I'd feel so much. I thought I'd be happy for him, but it's like losing a part of myself. Jack chuckled gently. That's what being a parent feels like. Hurts in places you never knew could ache. She leaned against him. I never thought I'd get to feel this kind of hurt. This kind of love. He took her hand and kissed her fingers. You've given all of us something we didn't know we were missing. We're better because of you. As time passed, Clara became a cornerstone of the town without even meaning to. She started volunteering at the church, bringing meals to the sick, helping new mothers who struggled to keep up. She had once thought her infertility made her useless. But now, the very love she carried, untied from blood or biology, made her indispensable. One woman, newly widowed and overwhelmed by 4 children, approached Clara after Sunday service and asked, How do you do it? You make it look so easy. Clara smiled, brushing a curl behind her ear. It's never easy. But love has a way of teaching you how to keep going, even when you think you can't. The woman stared at her. You raised 5. You're a miracle. Clara didn't say anything at first. Then she said softly, No, I just didn't stop showing up, even when it hurt. One evening in early summer, Clara stood by the window watching the sunset bleed orange and gold across the hills. The scent of fresh bread lingered in the kitchen. Jack was out fixing the fence posts with the boys, and the girls were brushing their dolls by the fireplace. Clara took a moment to herself, hands wrapped around a warm cup of tea, her thoughts drifting to a time when she never believed such peace could exist. Suddenly, a knock came at the door. Clara opened it and froze. Standing before her was her father. He was older now, gray streaks in his beard, eyes weary and unsure. Behind him stood her mother, her gaze downcast, hands clutched tightly in front of her apron. Clara couldn't breathe. The room tilted slightly. She hadn't seen them in nearly 8 years. Clara, her father said, removing his hat. We heard you were living here. Her voice caught in her throat. What do you want? Her mother looked up, tears already gathering. We wanted to see you, to know if you were all right. Clara stood still. She didn't know if she was angry or just tired. After what you did? After selling me like a sack of potatoes to that monster? Her father looked ashamed, truly ashamed, for the first time in her memory. We were wrong, desperate, and I've thought of you every day since, but I didn't know how to fix it. Jack arrived just then, saw them at the door, and immediately stepped beside Clara. Everything all right? Clara didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked at her parents, these people who had once handed her over like a burden, and then at Jack, whose presence felt like a shield. The children peeked from inside, sensing something strange. I don't hate you, Clara said, her voice steady, but I don't need you anymore. I have a family now, a real one. Her mother burst into tears, and her father looked down at the ground, speechless. Jack didn't say anything, but he rested his hand on Clara's shoulder and squeezed gently. They left not long after. No big fight, no dramatic scene, just 2 people walking away with the weight of their past on their shoulders. Clara closed the door softly and turned to find all 5 children staring at her. Lily ran up first and wrapped her arms around Clara's waist. Was that your ma and pa? Yes, sweetheart. Are they bad people? Clara bent down and hugged her. They were scared people. And sometimes scared people do very bad things, but we don't have to be like them. That night, Jack held her a little tighter. He didn't say anything about what happened. He just kissed her forehead and whispered, You're the strongest person I've ever known. And Clara, for once, believed it. The seasons turned slowly, each one carving deeper roots into Clara's soul. Spring brought wildflowers and children's laughter echoing through the hills. Summer brought long days in the fields and evenings on the porch, Jack's hand always finding hers. Autumn was Clara's favorite, cool breezes, cinnamon bread in the oven, and the children bundled up in wool as they chased each other through piles of golden leaves. Winter came with a quiet grace, the fireplace always glowing, and the sound of soft stories shared beneath warm quilts. By now, Clara was no longer just Miss Clara to the neighbors. She was Clara Callahan, wife of the kindest man in the territory, mother to 5 bright and loving children, and heart of the home that seemed to draw every traveler, every lost soul, like a beacon. One of those travelers was a young woman named Millie. She'd been found wandering near the riverbank, bruised, frightened, and pregnant. Jack brought her home one night, wrapped in his coat, and Clara didn't hesitate for a second. She knew that look in Millie's eyes. She'd seen it in her own reflection many years ago. Fear, shame, and the haunting belief that no one wanted her. But Clara wanted her. She fed her, bathed her, and gave her a room. Millie wept in her arms the first night, not because of her pain, but because she couldn't believe someone would show her such tenderness without expecting anything in return. Clara whispered to her, "You're safe now. You don't have to run anymore." Millie stayed through the birth of her baby boy, whom she named Thomas. And though she eventually moved on to start a new life in a nearby town, she always returned to visit Clara, calling her Mama Clara with affection in her voice and tears in her eyes. Clara realized, as she watched Millie rock her son on the porch one day, that she hadn't just become a mother to Jack's children. She had become something more, a nurturer of lost hearts. Her infertility had once been seen as her greatest flaw, the thing that deemed her worthless in the eyes of her own parents. But here, now, in this wild, beautiful world she had built with her own hands and heart, Clara saw the truth. She hadn't been born to carry children, she'd been born to carry people. Each person who passed through her life, each soul battered by the harsh wind of life, found comfort in her presence. And Clara, once discarded, once deemed useless, had become a woman whose love filled every empty corner it touched. The children had grown too. The eldest, James, was now nearly a man, helping Jack run the land. Sarah dreamed of being a school teacher and spent hours reading aloud to her siblings. Clara watched them become kind, brave, honest people, and knew deep in her bones that blood didn't make a mother. Love did. Jack often said, "You've held this family together better than I ever could." And she would just smile and shake her head. "You gave me something to hold on to," she'd reply. But Jack knew the truth. He had saved her life when he stopped that wagon on the road all those years ago. But Clara? She had saved all of them? It was a chilly autumn morning when Clara sat alone by the old willow tree just beyond the pasture. The mist hugged the earth like a soft blanket, and the sky was painted with the soft gold of sunrise. She held a letter in her hand, one that had arrived by mail just the day before. It was from her mother. After nearly 15 years of silence, Clara had read every word twice, her heart torn between old wounds and cautious curiosity. The letter was short, penned in shaky handwriting, full of regret. Her father had passed away the previous winter. Her mother, now frail and alone, wrote to say she was sorry for selling Clara, for not fighting for her, for not being a mother when she needed one. "I've lived with the shame every day," the letter said, "and if God gives me one last mercy, I hope it's to see you again. Just once." Clara had stared at the paper for hours after reading it. Memories she had buried deep beneath years of peace and love resurfaced like ghosts. She hadn't thought of her parents in so long, hadn't dared to. She had told herself she was done with that chapter of her life. But she also knew what it felt like to be lost and hopeless. She knew what it was to reach for grace and not know if it would come. So, 2 days later, Clara packed a small bag, kissed Jack and the children goodbye, and boarded the coach to her old town. She didn't know what she expected. Maybe to stand tall before the woman who'd thrown her away and show her that she had built something beautiful. Maybe to hear the words she had longed for as a child. "I was wrong. You were always enough." When she arrived, the town looked smaller, quieter. The streets held shadows of her past, but they no longer scared her. She found her mother living in a modest house near the edge of town. The woman who answered the door was older, thinner, with wisps of gray hair and tired eyes that widened in disbelief at the sight of her daughter. "Clara?" she whispered. Clara nodded. Tears welled in her mother's eyes. "You came." They sat at the kitchen table for hours. Her mother apologized again and again, her voice cracking with guilt and longing. She explained how fear, pressure, and shame had made them cruel. that losing Clara had haunted her every day since. Clara listened quietly. The pain didn't disappear, but something in her softened. She had carried that hurt for too long, and now finally she could let it go. "I forgive you," Clara said, her voice steady. "Not because it didn't hurt, but because I won't carry that weight anymore." Her mother sobbed into her hands, and Clara reached across the table to take them gently in hers. When she returned home a week later, the children ran to her, hugging her tightly, bombarding her with stories and questions. Jack stood on the porch, watching her with the same patient, steady love he had always given. When their eyes met, she felt everything settle. The past no longer defined her. The future was hers to shape. Clara planted a garden that spring, her first real garden, right outside the window of the kitchen. She filled it with sunflowers, marigolds, and wild herbs. Jack teased her about her flower obsession, but helped her tend it every morning. The children added their own little touches: stones with painted hearts, little wooden signs that read, "Mama Clara's Patch." The garden bloomed wildly, defiantly. It was her symbol of healing, of roots planted deep, not in bloodlines or tradition, but in love. It became the place she would go when life felt overwhelming, where she would talk to the sky and thank the winds for the strange, twisted journey that brought her here. Claire had once believed she was broken. She had been told she wasn't worth a thing, but in truth, she had simply been waiting for the right soil to bloom. And bloom she did. Years later, when Clara was old and gray, her children grown and with children of their own, she would sit on that same porch where she once told Jack her story. A soft smile would grace her face as she watched her grandchildren chase each other through the fields. Jack, still her steady rock, would sit beside her, their hands always intertwined. People in the valley spoke her name with reverence, not because she was famous, but because she had changed so many lives with the strength of her heart. Young women came to her for guidance. Orphans found warmth under her roof. Broken people found healing in her words. And whenever someone asked her how she did it, how she became so full of love after all she had been through, Clara would say simply, "I was once nothing in the eyes of the world, but love found me, and I chose to become everything they said I couldn't be." She had been sold by her own parents because of something she couldn't control. But in the end, she built a family stronger than blood, a life fuller than any dream she'd dared to have, and a legacy that would outlive pain and prejudice. She was Clara Callahan, not broken, not barren, but bountiful, a mother to many, a warrior of love, and no one, not the past, not time, not even the cruelest memory, could take that away.